From the fall of empires to the ideas that shaped our souls, this is history without limits. Welcome to Borderless Timeline, where history transcends borders.
On the cold winter evening of February 27, 1943, a team of 9 Norwegian commandos arrive at the Norsk hydroelectric plant. Their mission: sabotage the Nazis' heavy water production, which is vital to Hitler and his Nazis creating an atomic bomb.
The Underside is a story that shows the dedication that people during the Second World War had to the cause.
We weren't talking about a weapon of the ordinary sort. This was something which was extraordinary. This was something which would change the direction of history.
This is one of the most important weapon production facilities in the entirety of Nazi Germany.
Germany gaining access to this heavy water or to the technology of the heavy water plant would have been a disaster.
In 1911 in Norway, they built the Vemork hydroelectric plant, which was a massive, massive facility.
Initially, we know it's there as a fertilization factory, as a hydroelectric facility, but the byproduct of which, heavy water, has become the raison d'etre of the plant. And this scientific gold mine, really, for want of a better expression, is, of course, courtesy of the know-how of several Norwegian scientists.
Scientists in the early 1930s discovered that Vemork's facility's byproduct is heavy water, a form of water with a unique atomic structure and properties which can be used in the production of nuclear power and weapons.
It's really another route to it. Instead of using graphite as a motoring element, it involves a deuterium oxide or heavy water. And the whole design there is to control the process of fission so that it doesn't go boom.
Harnessing something that's potentially fatal on a macro scale, with this heavy water being the catalyst for that, this alternative isotope of hydrogen.
Leif Tronstad, a Norwegian scientist, is a celebrated scientist, and he's the brilliant mind behind the idea of the heavy water process.
The head of Norsk Hydro enlists Tronstad to design a new building at the Vemork plant, dedicated to producing heavy water on an industrial scale. Around the same time, a seismic shift in Europe is about to happen, as Germany elects a new leader.
Hitler assumes power in 1933.
Hitler's Nazi regime is brutal.
Almost immediately, they begin to root out any kind of opposition that they feel is political or social.
As the grip of the regime tightens, many scientists, particularly Jewish, flee the country to pursue their work beyond the Nazi grasp.
Scientific minds, when they leave a country, it's often considered a brain drain. So the country is losing their brain or their ability to innovate or advance technology, science, research.
Germany becomes inhospitable for so many scientists, particularly these Jewish scientists, and somebody like Albert Einstein does have to leave so that he can continue to not only be a scientist, but just live his life.
Despite many bright minds fleeing the country, those loyal to the Nazi regime stay behind to continue their work. A number of scientists working on the development of nuclear energy make a revolutionary yet terrifying discovery that could give Hitler the ultimate weapon. But they were missing one key element. Meanwhile, Tronstad's designs at Vemork become a reality. And with the new 8-story plant complete, the station now has a designated heavy water production site. French and German scientists expressed their interest in obtaining large quantities for their nuclear energy programs.
Everyone who is in the region wants access to the water because it's so necessary.
Harnessing something that's potentially fatal on a macro scale, with this heavy water being the catalyst for that.
German policies became increasingly hostile towards Jews, homosexuals, and disabled people during the mid to late 1930s. Ideals of racial superiority and ultranationalism start to become more and more prevalent throughout the country.
As early as 1935, they passed the Nuremberg race laws. It prohibits interracial marriage and relationships. It prohibits other non-Aryan races or groups of people from holding jobs in the law and medicine and academia.
In March of 1938, the Nazis annexed neighboring Austria, an early sign of their true expansionist ambitions. Later that year, German scientists Otto Hahn and Fritz Strassmann make the breakthrough discovery of nuclear fission at their laboratory in Berlin.
These are the men who identify nuclear fission, this reaction that demonstrates or shows the way forward in terms of nuclear energy. And what do you need that for? You need that for the creation of a bomb.
Once they have that knowledge of how to create the energy, the next step in terms of using it is actually very quick.
News about the nuclear experiments in Germany travels quickly across Europe. French Nobel Prize-winning scientist Frédéric Joliot-Curie writes a letter to his Soviet colleague, alerting him of the Germans' discovery. The news also reaches Niels Bohr, a leading Danish scientist who was preparing to leave on a trip to the United States. Once arriving in New York City, he shares this news with prominent American scientists, sparking the beginning of the American nuclear energy program.
Since the news of what could be done with the heavy water had become common scientific knowledge, every intelligence agency was interested and was actively perhaps pursuing some plan of gaining access to that heavy water.
Within the span of less than a year, each major power begins to ramp up their nuclear research and experiments, recognizing the great potential of harnessing nuclear energy. In September 1939, not long after the race to harness nuclear energy, Germany's expansionist ambitions enter their next phase.
Hitler invades Poland, and the ball game begins. Poland is the trigger. A lot of people did not want to go to war because they remembered the First World War. But because Poland was invaded, Britain, France, they have to fight back.
As Europe descends into war, the Nazis continue their pursuit to harness nuclear energy and develop a nuclear weapon. The French government recognizes the importance of the heavy water at the Vermerk facility in Norway and begins attempts to smuggle the heavy water out of Norway.
The French recognize how important nuclear energy is and how powerful it is. So they, of course, don't want Germany to have access to it.
So in an interesting collaboration, prominent French scientists are working with the French intelligence service in trying to identify where the heavy water is being produced and get it out of Norway.
The French intelligence services approaches Jacques Allier, who, before the war, worked at the bank that helped finance the project to build the hydroelectric plant in Norway. Because of his connections, they assigned him the task of getting the heavy water out of Norway, but time was ticking.
Norway is a country that has many proud scientific advancements. Norway is an industrial innovator, a manufacturing innovator.
Norway also was sort of a reservoir of natural resources.
There's a huge number of reasons why Norway is targeted really early on. For a start, it's got absolutely crucial ports. It's Atlantic facing. If you want to win the battle at the Atlantic, you need access to their ports. You also need access to their airfields. So on the geographical front, in terms of winning a strategic war across that Atlantic-facing perimeter, you need Norway.
All this makes it an even more compelling target for Germany.
French intelligence service member Jacques Allier flies to Norway with a fake passport and a fake name to meet with the director of Norsk Hydro.
They had enough foresight to realize the Germans were hell-bent on getting an atomic bomb, so they were keen on getting the heavy water out of the Norwegian hydroelectric plant before the Nazi invasion.
Once in Norway, Allier secures all the heavy water, 180 kilos worth. But he fears the Germans might be onto their plans. In order to avoid capture, Allier books 2 separate flights, one with the heavy water to Scotland and another as a diversion to Amsterdam. The Germans chose to force down the wrong plane.
We've got the heavy water, all 180 kilograms, out of Norway, and it's on the road. It's moving faster than Rommel's panzers. But the problem is, this is just a temporary setback for the Germans.
As the heavy water is secretly smuggled into France, the Nazis continue their invasion of Europe.
Germany invaded Norway in April of 1940.
The conquest of Norway by Germany tends to be seen as pretty rapid, but it does take some time to happen. And Norwegian resistance is the reason why it does take some time.
As thousands of German soldiers are deployed across the country, Norwegians put up a fierce fight. Leading some of the resistance is Leif Tronstad, the scientist who helped develop the heavy water process at Vermerk. Despite the efforts of the Norwegians, they cannot hold off the German advance.
Germany, by June of 1940, is firmly in control of Norway, including the hydroelectric plant.
Having quickly gained the upper hand, the Germans continue their aggression and launch their campaign against France, only 1 month after the invasion of Norway.
Prime Minister Daladier and his military advisors think that they can hold any two-front war which may come out of this push into Poland by Germany.
The French retreat, both mentally and physically, to the Maginot Line, which is this extended network of fortifications along the Franco-German frontier.
The French, having underestimated their enemy, are overwhelmed by the onslaught of Germans pouring into their country. As the Germans begin their march to Paris, Curie worries that the stolen heavy water, hidden in France, will fall into the Nazis' hands. When it becomes clear that France cannot hold off on the Germans, Joliot-Curie and Jacques Allier decide to move the heavy water from France to England.
The problem, of course, is France is overrun and Paris is taken over by the Nazis.
Fortunately, Allier avoids Paris, and the heavy water is met in Bordeaux by a British cargo ship and is safely smuggled to England. Although both Norway and France have now fallen to the Nazi regime, the Norwegian scientist Leif Tronstad is not ready to give up.
Before the Norwegian government flees for England, before Tronstad, the great scientist, flees, they establish a resistance movement and an intelligence network around Norway. So even though Tronstad and the king and others are in exile in England, they have resources on the ground.
So Leif Tronstad knows a lot about what's going on in the plant. He has the ins and outs. He's basically created an underground spy network of his own with him at the head of this spy network. He's keeping the British informed.
So the Norwegian resistance monitoring what's happening at the plant is important, one, so that they know what's going on, that they can keep track of what the Germans are doing, but they can also report back to allies in other countries.
With his spy network, Tronstad is able to provide British intelligence constant information on the Nazis' activities at the plant.
In a war like the Second World War, information is so key at all levels. So the more information you have about what the other side is doing, the better you can plan and the better you can create your own strategies moving forward for how you want to proceed.
The Norwegian High Command in England is very important to the understanding of the resistance movement in Norway.
Once in exile, Leif Tronstad and the Norwegian High Command work closely with the British SOE, known as Special Operations Executive.
Special Operations Executive is basically counterintelligence, insurgency inside of a foreign country. They assist with resistance movements in country, for example, Norway and France.
Having had to withdraw his troops from France after the Nazis' rapid invasion, British Prime Minister Winston Churchill recognizes the potential of the SOE.
For Winston Churchill, something like the SOE is a great way to hit back at the Nazis without having to worry about invasion at the time.
Essentially functioning as an underground army, the SOE is primarily made up of civilian volunteers. One of the key groups in the SOE is known as Company Linge, which consists of mainly Norwegians who fled to England after the German invasion of Norway.
Of course people would volunteer. Their nations had already capitulated. There was no national army to join. So to escape to London, to fight some force, to join some force which would fight the Nazis, would be something which would be on the top of the mind of many of these people.
As the Nazis tightened their grip on the occupied nations of Europe, the Allies continued their nuclear research. American scientists at the University of California and Columbia University are working on various methods of harnessing nuclear power. Recognizing the potential and urgency in utilizing this great new source of energy, the British in 1941 released the Maud Report, which contains plans for producing a nuclear bomb.
So there's a real rush for them to develop a capacity. That's articulated by 1940 in the possibility of developing a uranium-based weapon.
American intelligence was now trying to beef up and meet the threat that they now have on what would become a two-front war.
December 1941, the Japanese attack Pearl Harbor and the Americans enter the war.
A state of war has existed between the United States and the Japanese Empire.
Only a month after the U.S. is attacked and officially enters the war, President Franklin D. Roosevelt gives his approval to his science advisor for the construction of an atomic bomb. This marks the start of the Manhattan Project.
So it only takes about a month, a little over a month, for Franklin Roosevelt to give the green light on the Manhattan Project.
By early 1942, it's clear to the Allies that the Nazis are hyper-focused on harnessing nuclear energy.
The Norwegian Resistance and Intelligence Network that Tronstad helps to develop, they're providing regular updates to him while he's in England. One of the most disturbing is that Germany has dedicated itself to ramping up the production of heavy water in the hydroelectric plant.
The Germans start seriously focusing on the production of not just heavy water. They establish a uranium club. They're looking at all the different possible ways enriching uranium. They're looking at the production of these isotopes. They're looking at heavy water. They are not closing down any option.
After receiving the concerning reports coming out of Norway, Leif Tronstad suggests a small targeted operation to stop the Nazis' heavy water production. His report lands on the desk of the British Prime Minister.
Winston Churchill decides in 1942 that Vermork is a key target. It is where the heavy water is produced for the atomic weapons.
So the German operations at Vermork are a threat to the Allies. There's no question about that.
So the organization that really takes the lead in trying to prevent Germany from getting the heavy water and from trying to sabotage this hydroelectric plant is the SOE, that's the Special Operations Executive.
In the meantime, conditions in Norway are getting worse. In October 1942, the Nazis begin rounding up Jews in Norway. More than a third of Norway's 2,100 Jews were deported to death camps during the war. Tronstad and other Norwegian resistant members are desperate to do something for their country.
So yet another tragedy is the construction of concentration camps, followed by the mass construction of concentration camps. There were a number of camps, Dachau, Auschwitz, and others that had 10, 20, hundreds of satellite camps. By 1942, the complexion of the war was changing. On the Eastern Front, Hitler planned the invasion of the Soviet Union, an ambitious, if ever there was one, strategy. Operation Barbarossa, but that would not work out.
In February 1943, the Germans suffer a major defeat on the Eastern Front at Stalingrad. With over 100,000 casualties, this loss reveals that Germans are not invincible. Although things looked bad on the Eastern Front, the Germans were getting closer to developing a weapon that could change all that.
They want more of it. They want almost unlimited amounts of heavy water.
They're bound and determined to get an atomic bomb.
Recognizing the dangers of allowing the Nazis' production of heavy water to continue, the Allies are desperate to stop them. Once planning for the attack on the Vermerk plant begins, Tronstad insists on a small targeted attack rather than a bombing rate.
His greatest concern is that the Allies would simply bomb the area. And in doing so, he pointed out, importantly, that it probably wouldn't do the damage that you imagine.
Despite Tronstad's insistence on a small targeted attack, he is overruled, and British soldiers begin training for a mission called Operation Freshman.
Now, how do you best eliminate a plant that's hard to reach? It's sitting at the bottom of an 8-story reinforced building. It's surrounded by Norwegian civilians, and as a bombing target is at best unlikely. The thinking is, well, you'll send in an elite task force with gliders.
Halifax bombers take off from England, and they're towing these Horsa gliders.
Throughout the war, the Allies successfully utilized gliders on various commando operations, specifically for infiltrating behind enemy lines.
Gliders are a very scary thing when you're on the inside of them. When the glider is pulled from its tow plane, it is on its own.
The problem is, number one, it's a long flight to Norway. Number two, the weather is horrible.
And these gliders crash on impact and kill some of the men on board. The survivors are found by the Germans, and they are all killed.
At that time, German soldiers had an order to kill any enemies that were involved with commando operations.
That means every SOE man is killed on this raid. That means the gliders are ineffective against the Axis in that point. And that also means the Germans understand that Britain sees something in this plant.
Preventing the Germans from gaining access to the heavy water was so important that a few setbacks would not have deterred people. Even losing the element of surprise now just means you have to plan differently.
After a disastrous first attempt, the SOE turns to leave Tronstad and Company Linge to lead the next attack. This mission is given the name Operation Gunnerside.
Tronstad is the perfect person to try to disrupt the plans at Vemork. He knows it better than anybody else. He is the one who you would want to be in charge of this operation. He knows exactly what the plant is capable of, but he also knows every nook and cranny of the space. So he can best come up with a plan to disrupt what the Germans are trying to do.
To pull off this daring mission, Leif Tronstad handpicks a small team of Norwegian patriots who, like him, fled to England after the Nazi occupation of Norway. The Gunnerside team is led by 23-year-old Joachim Raunberg. He's joined by Klaus Hellberg, a 24-year-old who had grown up in the area around Vemurk and worked as a tour guide in the surrounding mountains prior to the war. As well as Knut Hauklied, Frederick Kaiser, Birje Stromsheim, and other members of the explosives team.
They are not formerly military trained men. They're even better than that. They are a hybrid. They are physically fit, they are young, and they have extraordinary powers of motivation because they are local and this is their patch. They want to protect it.
And they are trying to fight back against the Nazis for their country where this takes place. That makes it even more personal.
Having an intimate knowledge of the Vemurk facility, Tronstad proposes that the team target the heavy water cylinders located in the plant's basement.
Tronstad knows the hydroelectric plant. So if the French, if the British, if the Americans, if the Allies are trying to get into and sabotage this plant, Tronstad becomes invaluable.
Tronstad suggests they blow up the heavy water cylinders with explosives to ensure they halt the Nazis' heavy water production. The team will then escape to Sweden.
If you want precision, you have to have precise information. This kind of information could only be provided through reconnaissance photos.
You need highly skilled intelligence to understand the way in, the way out, and where things are located inside the building.
The documents provided by Norwegian resistance at Vemurk reveal that 18 cylinders need to be destroyed. With the massive increase in heavy water production, each one of these cylinders will be filled to the brim.
Every one of the cylinders housing this water needs to be taken out.
Therefore, the commandos have to go through some rigorous training. They're practicing forging rivers. They're practicing mountain climbing. They're camping. They're hiking. Their physical fitness requirements are extraordinary.
They do reconnaissance in the woods. They do code and cipher. They're taught how to read each other's communications. They're taught how to use guns, how to use metal cutters. They are taught how to climb rock faces. They already know how to ski. In many respects, they are, if you like, your Renaissance fighters, because they don't just hold a gun and do close combat fighting, but they have what's up here, knowledge of the local area, an ability to outsmart the enemy.
Before the official operation begins, a few of the Gunnerside team members are sent to the Norwegian mountain wilderness surrounding Vemurk to survey and prepare for the attack.
The whole mission kicks off on February 16, 1943, as 6 Norwegians parachute onto the Norwegian countryside.
Time is of the essence. With every passing day, the Germans are ramping up and producing more and more heavy water.
The Operation Gunnerside team parachute into the Telemark region of Norway, into an area far away from any German patrol points. Their first task is to rendezvous with their teammates who arrived months earlier and are waiting for them in a cabin.
So these men who just parachuted into Norway have to traverse 60 kilometers of land to get to the cabin. This is nothing easy. This is not like taking a walk in the park.
The cabin where the Gunnerside team will begin their mission is located on the Hardangervidda Plateau. Legends say that this mountain plateau grows so cold that it freezes flames in a fire.
Most of the hardship was up on the plateau getting there, where there really weren't any options, where the blizzard locked them in. What else were they going to do?
At this stage of the mission, the most important equipment they have are skis.
Skiing is synonymous with Norway.
If there were non-skiers on that team, they would have perished.
Once the team arrives at the cabin, they're hit with a massive blizzard.
Landing in the middle of a blizzard, you have to shelter in place, because if you go out into the snow in a blizzard and you don't have really any wayfinding markers, it is a death trap.
The bad weather is a delay they could do without. The clock is ticking. Meanwhile, across the Atlantic, the Americans continue with their nuclear research at an unprecedented pace.
The Americans have multiple facilities, secret and semi-secret facilities around the country to develop this, from a big processing plant for uranium in the mountains of Tennessee to the University of Chicago, where some of the world's greatest physicists were gathering to work on the next steps in developing an atomic bomb.
With Manhattan successfully underway, the Americans and the British become increasingly convinced that they'll be the first to develop a military capacity, a bomb for this, and that's exactly what happens.
The Allies have no idea how close the Germans are to developing their own atomic bomb. So it's essential for Operation Gunnerside to be a success. After holding up in the cabin for a week, the weather clears, and the Gunnerside team begin their journey.
We hear about raids in the modern era, going in and finding a target, maybe being there on the ground for 2 to 4 hours and then being extracted. This raid takes well over a week.
During their training with the SOE, the Gunnerside team was shown diagrams and life-size replicas of the heavy water cylinders. They decide the best way to destroy them are with plastic explosives.
So the use of plastic explosives allows them to carry it throughout this whole operation, making the entire thing easier because they are lighter, they're more portable.
These explosives also allow for a precise and targeted explosion to take place, avoiding unnecessary damage or harm to civilians and workers at the plant, something that was essential to Tronstad and his team.
Tronstad doesn't want an air raid. He doesn't want anything that will create mass destruction to Norway. He understands that if you send in ground troops or you do mass air raids in Norway, that it's going to take years and probably decades to recover from that.
During their 40-mile journey to Vemurk, the Gunnerside team skis by day and rests by night. They finally reach the gorge near the waterfall located just south of the Vemurk heavy water plant.
That would be an intimidating thing to see. When you get to the plant, you see the waterfall, you finally are back there. It would have been an overwhelming moment, I imagine.
And in front of the factory is a massive ravine, a huge gorge with a bridge leading over it into the hydroelectric plant. The bridge is guarded, heavy security, which means you either have to scale down this mountain or you have to forge a deep ravine crossing an icy waterway and climb back up to get in. All the while it's surrounded by barbed wire, lights, guards, mines. So getting into this hydroelectric plant is not going to be an easy task.
During their occupation of Norway, the Germans stationed hundreds of thousands of troops in the country, 1 soldier for every 8 Norwegians.
The reality of the occupation, once it starts becoming apparent, is already too much for people to bear.
The occupation brings severe economic hardships to Norway. Food and other basic commodities become scarce, and the country faces a real risk of famine. The Gunnerside team waits patiently outside of the Vemurk plant, observing the German guards. They know that crossing the heavily guarded bridge is impossible and have figured out an alternative way of getting inside the plant.
There is one place that they can go in, and they can find their way in, and it leads right to the plant, and that is the railroad line.
Realizing this would be their only way in via the railroad line, Raunberg leads the team down into the frozen gorge.
The valley is very windswept. You can imagine when you walk between buildings and it's really windy, that wind forces through there harder than if you're on the other side of the building. It's the same with this valley. That is a very dangerous place to be.
It's the 600-foot gorge down to the Mana River below. By the way, this is the bleak midwinter. Freezing conditions, ice, snow, and a field. Not even pretty in summer, by the way, that you would have to negotiate.
But once the men have successfully climbed down the gorge, the river presents a new challenge.
You have to partially go in the water. So remember how cold it is outside. Think how cold the water is. And then when you get out of this, now you're windswept and you're partially wet.
Although with the real risk of hypothermia, Raunberg pushes his men on, as even after the river, they still have a frozen 600-foot cliff to climb, which leads right to the railroad line.
So it's one thing on top of another to try to make your way to this plant. This is how important this raid is, that men are willing to go to this length to make sure that Hitler doesn't get his atomic weapon.
Incredibly, Raunberg and his men make it all the way across the gorge and reach the railway line.
Extremely challenging, extremely demanding, and let's not forget that besides all these physical demands, there's also the psychological demand of, I've not come here just for a cross-country ski trip. I actually have to go up and blow up a heavy water plant guarded by Germans.
At around midnight on February 28, 1943, the Gunnerside team is ready to enter the heavy water plant.
So the team decides to split basically half and half. There's a covering squad, provide protection, and then there's the actual team that's going to set the explosives. The team that's going to set the explosives knows from Tronstad where to go.
Thanks to his reconnaissance, they know they can enter the plant via an unguarded utility tunnel. They sneak through the narrow utility tunnel with their explosives and finally gain access to the building.
Until the last minute, they have to make adjustments and they have to tweak their plan and respond to the situation as it is developing. And they are now within sight, and all that remains is to blow up the cylinders.
There's Germans around, you're probably scared, you're making this dash, you know that you have to be quick, and any small change to the plan could throw off the entire thing.
They finally reach the basement, and there's 18 massive containers, and as Tronstad worried, their worst fears are realized. They're fooled.
The commandos run into one person, one of the Norwegians, who's working inside the plant, and they confront him, guns drawn, because they're doing their raid, and the Norwegian actually asks what they're doing. They tell them that they're there to blow up the facility and blow up the heavy water cylinders, and the Norwegian asks, are you here to kill me and all of us too? And they say, no, we're not here to kill you. It was very important to Tronstad and others that innocent Norwegians aren't killed in this raid.
The Germans at the Vermerk plant are almost exclusively guards, while the people doing the actual work of creating the heavy water are all Norwegian workers. During Germany's occupation of Norway, many Norwegians are forced to work in factories to help the German war effort. Norwegians are prohibited from flying the Norwegian flag, singing their national anthem, and even reading literature that the Germans deem inappropriate can get you sentenced to death.
The living conditions during the Nazi reign, it was deplorable. Shortages of medicine, shortages of food, people lost their jobs, homes were confiscated, freedoms and rights were curtailed, and on a drop of a dime, anybody could be accused of disloyalty. German soldiers parading through the capital. It was a horrific moment for the people of Norway.
Imagine being in Norway. Imagine being under occupation, the indignity of it, the paucity of any kind of entertainment, of decent food, of proper employment, the compromises that are constantly being made. And this is, I think, something very hard for the Anglophone world to get their head around. In Britain, we don't have the heel of the jackboot arriving in our country.
In the basement of the heavy water plant, Raunberg begins to set up the explosives. Everything has led up to these crucial final moments, and time is of the essence.
The explosives have to work in full for everything to go properly. Every one of the cylinders housing this water needs to be taken out. So they are issued explosives that are kind of like what we would think of as more like a C4 putty. It's kind of a thing that can be placed in different areas and twisted around, molded to a location, and then ignited through having a primer placed into it, which is clipped off, and then you have a few minutes to get out of there.
But halfway through setting up the explosives, it looks like the game is up.
The blast team is busy putting their explosives on the canisters when all of a sudden a window shatters next to them. Now imagine what had to go through their mind. They thought they were caught, but it was one of the teammates. Imagine the chaotic scene in their minds of what was transpiring when they realized that one of their teammates was the one who broke the window. And I'm sure that he didn't hear the end of that for a while.
After a heart-racing moment of thinking they had been caught, Ronberg continues to finish setting up the explosives. Meanwhile, Stromsheim is sent to open the exterior basement door for an easy escape while Kaiser guards the Norwegian workers. Every second spent inside the plant increases their chances of getting caught and the mission being a total failure. Once Ronberg is finished setting up all the explosives, he cuts the fuse down from 2 minutes to 30 seconds. He checks the explosives one last time and lights the fuse.
The shorter the mission, the less likely you are to get caught.
The fuses are lit, and the men exit as quickly as possible out of the plant.
I have no idea how these commandos managed to do this. To set the fuse for 30 seconds when you're in the basement of a massive hydroelectric factory teeming with Nazi guards, there's so much that could have gone wrong. But they managed to get out of the hydroelectric plant.
As they run out of the plant about 20 meters or so, they hear this distant thunk. It's not a loud bang, it's not a big explosion, it's a nice little thump. And they think, well, that's it. That must be the explosions that are going off. They're far enough away so the Germans don't see them at the time. And one German kind of looks around, and they see this guard just looking around, wondering what's going on. He appears to be thinking about what that may have been.
The gunnerside team makes their escape from the Vermerk facility, and alarms eventually begin to go off. Within an hour, the facility's chief engineer and German guards arrive in the basement to find the damaged heavy water cylinders.
So it's a perfect getaway for something that sounds like it's out of a spy novel, and it works to perfection in that way. The charges are laid, cylinders are broken, the heavy water plant is disturbed for a while, and the men get away.
Ronberg and his team retrace their steps through the gorge and quickly get as far away from the Vermerk facility as they can. They know the Germans will be right behind them looking for whoever had done this.
It's a highly successful operation, especially considering the odds and considering that this was somewhat telegraphed, meaning that because of the earlier failure, the Germans knew that it was a target and yet still weren't able to prevent, these very brave men from carrying out an operation of that nature.
When you think about the whole story, you think about the distances that had to be traversed and then the precision with which the plant was targeted.
The mission's a success. There's a massive amount of heavy water that literally goes down the drain. Top German general von Falkenhorst comes to inspect the damage. He ends up saying it's a quote-unquote most splendid coup.
The response of it, oh, it's a splendid coup, it shows that at some level there is respect between combatants in the middle of a war. For as much as you might have respected what they did from a tactical standpoint, you obviously don't want to let them get away with what they did. So you do put on this major manhunt to try to find them, because this is the sort of thing that you can't just let go. You have to respond in kind in some way.
3,000 soldiers are brought in to hunt down this handful of commandos in Norway. And to make the story even more compelling, the commandos managed to elude thousands of German soldiers combing the forests and countryside looking for them.
Although the Germans vastly outnumber the Gunnerside team in both people and resources, Ronberg and his team managed to elude the Germans and make their escape.
Several of the commandos somehow managed in the middle of the winter to ski a few hundred miles to Sweden, and they outdistanced the German soldiers.
You know, they divide into two teams, and one stays in the local vicinity to try to draw the attention of German forces and basically hides in the forest and in the mountains, and then the other team skis to Sweden.
It's a pure victory. It's a wonderful local moral high point. Norwegians fighting back on the inside against their German occupiers. And then, of course, they are on skis, they separate, they spread out, they are 9 little needles in a haystack.
Having successfully sabotaged the Vermerk plant, Ronberg, Kaiser, Stromsheim, and Haugli make their escape to Sweden.
Sweden is next to Norway. It's a fellow Scandinavian country. It's neutral. And from Sweden, the commandos can get out without being detected. Also importantly, even though Sweden's neutral, it's assisting the Allies in various ways, and there's an active resistance movement in Sweden, and they're helping to train the Norwegian resistance and intelligence counter forces. News of the mission reaches the Allies as well as Leif Tronstad back in London, and of course it's welcome news.
The message Tronstad receives reads, "Operation carried out with 100% success. High concentration plant completely destroyed. Shots not exchanged, since the Germans didn't realize anything. Germans do not appear to know whence the party came or whither they disappeared." Operation Gunnerside is one of the most successful acts of sabotage during World War II, carried out by Norwegian patriots who had no formal military background. The SOE exercises are the only training they completed.
It was a clean victory, and that is the message that is transmitted back to Britain. Scot-free. We blew up the place, we blew up the cylinders. We didn't even blow up the place, they just blew up the cylinders. And we made a getaway, and we've all left with our lives intact.
Operation Gunnerside was a major success for the Allies and a crushing defeat for the Germans' nuclear weapons program. Throughout the German occupation of Norway, the Norwegian resistance proves to be a crucial asset to the Allied forces. What starts as a small sabotage unit will eventually grow into a full-on military force by the end of the war. Some of the other victories for the Norwegian resistance includes the destruction of 2 major German warships, called the Bismarck and the Tirpitz.
The Norwegian resistance comes out of that uniquely kind of Norwegian sense of identity, which means that they were not willing to be just assimilated into the Germanic Reich.
Although Operation Gunnerside was a success, by May 1943, the heavy water production facilities were rebuilt and operating once again. Later that year, in November, 140 American bombers flew over and bombed the plant. Unfortunately, 22 Norwegian civilians were killed, the exact tragedy Tronstad had hoped to avoid. But this bombing raid finally crushes Hitler's aspiration to build an atomic bomb once and for all, as the German dictator has major problems elsewhere, and troops are taken out of Norway.
Norway is no longer the priority that it was early in the war, so they have to shift people out of Norway, which is a response to what is happening elsewhere in the war.
So, nothing's going right for the Germans in that capacity, and a place like Norway becomes increasingly indefensible.
While the Germans retreat from Norway, Leif Tronstad continues with his work in the Norwegian resistance. this time taking part in Operation Sunshine, an operation to protect essential installations and particularly power stations from being destroyed by retreating German forces. Tragically, Tronstad will be killed during this mission.
Tronstad's end is therefore kind of poetic in a twisted, very ironic and sad fashion, right? Because, he dies the death that I suppose he and other resistance fighters ultimately planned for.
This kind of immortalizes him as one of Norway's great heroes, a scientist, a resistance fighter, a chemist, and a fallen hero in the fight against the Nazis.
Him being part of that resistance afterwards and continuing just shows the commitment to the cause and shows how devoted he was to Norway.
This is, again, the price that some people paid for this. I mean, that would have been enough danger for a couple of lifetimes faced by people like Tronstad, but the determination to keep fighting the Nazis and to ensure that they're finally out of Norway.
Gunnerside team leader Joachim Raunberg continues his work in the Norwegian resistance and goes on to lead other sabotage operations against the Germans. It is not until 1945 when he was awarded Norway's highest military decoration, the War Cross with Sword, that he realizes the significance of what he and his Gunnerside teammates had achieved. Operation Gunnerside, the brainchild of Leif Tronstad, was a truly amazing act of sabotage. This unorthodox frontline battle was a pivotal moment during World War II, putting a major dent in Nazi Germany's atomic plans and undoubtedly changing the course of the war.
The course of history would have been completely different in a terrifying sort of way.
Gunnerside is a story that shows the dedication that people during the Second World War had to the cause.
June 6, 1944, D-Day. As the Allies are storming the beaches in the largest amphibious invasion in history, a group of light infantrymen are in the midst of a dangerous operation behind enemy lines that will be critical to the success of D-Day. The mission? To capture and defend 2 bridges near the Orne River in northern France, a crucial point in both the Allies and the Nazis' battle plans. Although small in stature, these bridges will prove immensely important in the battle for Northern Europe.
D-Day is the beginning of the end for the Nazis and pretty much hinges on these 2 small bridges.
It's got all the elements of a really cool secret operation, because it is.
This was a feat of daring do. It was a specific enemy target, and one crucially that had to remain intact.
But how do they get there, and how long can they hold out? June 5, 1944, just before midnight, only hours before the planned start of D-Day, 6 Horsa gliders towed by Halifax bombers take off from RAF Tarrant Rushton in Dorset, England. They are embarking on a mission that could decide the fate of D-Day.
The weather's bad, it's overcast, it's drizzling, it's windy. They got to be able to get behind enemy lines safely and in a stealthy manner.
Their mission is to capture 2 strategically located bridges, vital to ensuring an Allied victory.
If this early mission is detected, it could undermine the secrecy and element of surprise for all of D-Day.
The Allies aim to change the course of World War II, beginning with the liberation of France. With the invasion of Poland in 1939 marking the start of the war, the Germans are on the offensive. Hitler has his eye on France. This strategic location will provide a tactical base for air and sea attacks against Britain. In March of 1940, the Germans begin their campaign against France. The French army has been weakened by World War I, and France is officially under German control just 2 months later. Amidst German occupation, an elaborate resistance network is created by French patriots.
They're the unsung heroes of World War II. Men and women, regular people now fighting against Nazi occupation, belonging to organized resistance groups like the Maquis or Alliance.
These operatives are essential to inform the Allies of German activity in the area.
Aerial reconnaissance, at least at that time, could only go so far because we're talking about observing things from thousands of feet away, from very high up. There were certain details which would be available only to people on the ground.
By 1943, the tides of war are changing for the Germans.
This is not Germany of 1939. This is a nation ravaged by war. Allied bombing has taken a significant toll, and their resources are seriously depleted.
After a string of victories throughout 1943, the Allies regained territories occupied by the Nazis.
The more successes you have, the more you believe that you can continue to be successful. And so you tend to go to bolder and bolder actions.
The Allies formulate a plan to liberate France and bring an end to the war. Operation Overlord. 339 Allied divisions commit to this battle. Over 1 million troops in total.
Resources are coming from virtually everyone who opposes the Nazis. So you have Free French soldiers, you have Canadians, the Americans, the British, and you have assorted persons from a variety of occupied countries.
On June 6th, 156,000 of these men will attempt to land on the beaches of Normandy and what would become known as D-Day.
We're talking about the greatest amphibious operation in history, and there's no guarantee it's going to work.
The resource allocation for D-Day is like nothing else. There is no precedent for it, certainly not on that scale. It takes years in preparation.
156,000 men, 5,000 ships, 11,000 aircraft. This is going to change the course of the Second World War.
Supreme Allied Commander General Dwight Eisenhower draws up plans to invade 5 beaches on the coast of Normandy, paving the way for an inland advance on the eastern flank.
You are landing a force the like of which the world has never seen before. If you can't get them out from the beaches upon which they've landed, you've got a problem. You need to ensure you have your route into mainland France. So you need to secure bridges out.
8 kilometers in from the Normandy coast, a bridge over the Caen Canal will allow the invasion force to quickly move east after landing. Another bridge just 470 meters east over the Orne River will provide a continued path inland from the beaches.
We have to hold the bridge so that the thousands and thousands of men and trucks and supplies can move their way toward Paris and ultimately Berlin. Secondly, we have to hold the bridges as a choke point so that the Nazis can't reinforce their overrun troops at Normandy.
Major General Richard Gale of the 6th Airborne Division is tasked with formulating a plan to complete this critical task. Gale selects Major John Howard to lead the operation on the ground.
Major John Howard is the pin-up of the so-called People's War. He is the guy who's climbed up through the ranks through dint of personal endeavour and military acumen. And he's a team player. He looks out for his boys. He's the man you want at the helm.
The initial plan was to capture the bridges using paratroopers, an idea that quickly falls by the wayside in favor of gliders.
Transport plane can come in and drop down hundreds, thousands of men, but they're like dandelion seeds in the wind. Where are they going to end up? A glider, on the other hand, you're all landing in the same aircraft in the same place. You get out together, you're still one unit. Not a minute is lost.
The glider is quiet, it has no engines, and it will be dropped off by a tug, that is a bomber pulling it, a fair distance away from where it's actually going to get to. But of course, a bomber makes noise, and the Allies had a cunning plan. The bombers continue on a slightly separate course and then drop bombs as if they're on a bombing run. And this, of course, was completely credible because that part of the coast was being bombed day after day after day in preparation for D-Day.
It's a really smart decision by the British and starts this chain of events that certainly plays out very famously on the beaches on the morning of June the 6th. But a lot was going on the ground overnight further inland. And it really does start with those 181 guys taking off from Dorset.
The force is comprised mostly of D Company of the Oxford and Buckinghamshire Light Infantry, the Ox and Bucks, they're reinforced by 2 platoons from B Company, plus 20 Royal Engineers and 12 glider pilots. The gliders will land southeast of Sword Beach, where the British landing force is due to arrive hours later. Once the bridges are seized and ready to be reinforced, Major Howard will tip off intelligence officers with the code words ham and jam. As they approach their targets, Major Howard in the lead glider recognizes the area from reconnaissance photographs and knows exactly what the German defenses are down below. At this stage of the war, the Allies control the skies and take every opportunity to take aerial photographs of potential invasion sites.
17 million photographs. Every gun emplacement, every bridge, every infantryman, every pole to prevent the landing of a parachute, each and every one was noted.
And of course, we're also getting information from agents on the ground, from resistance leaders, all putting together this picture.
Certain number of ways in which you can attack a bridge. The Germans set up all the defenses in order to prevent that.
They've got relatively formidable defensive positions. They've got machine gun nests on both bridges. On one bridge, they've got an anti-tank gun.
Barbed wire and a trench system are set up around the bridges, manned by 50 riflemen and machine gunners. The 736th Grenadier Regiment of the 716th Infantry. This unit is largely made up of poorly equipped men from German-occupied nations, with some older Germans mixed in. The German soldiers have instructions to destroy the bridges if necessary, to stop them from ending up in Allied hands. At 7 minutes after midnight on June 6th, the bombers, towing the British gliders, cast off their lines in preparation for landing.
3 gliders are going to land next to one bridge and 3 next to another bridge, 400 meters away. So it's a relatively tiny strip of land that they've got to land in, and they've got to land one after the other in synchronized order.
Major Howard instructs the glider pilots to land with the nose right against the barbed wire, surrounding their assigned bridges.
You don't have as much control of the aircraft as you would with an engine. So it's a great challenge, particularly to do it at night.
In order to pinpoint this exact location in the dark, the glider pilots must execute the dangerous and risky task of performing a dive approach and pulling up at the very last moment, slamming the glider into the ground as smoothly as possible and hoping for the best. But as the glider landings begin, things don't go to plan.
And the very first glider with Major John Howard comes in and sort of crash lands. The good news is it crash landed right next to the bridge.
They were going too fast when they came in, and then the final violent stop, so violent in fact that the 2 pilots are thrown out of their seats and up against the windshield, and yet despite this they land at exactly the right place. It couldn't have been more perfect. If you'd written that sequence of events in a novel, people wouldn't have believed it.
With the bumpy glider landing, Major Howard's seatbelt is broken and he bashes his head on the ceiling, rendering him unconscious for a few minutes and with a possible concussion.
When you're concussed, you're dizzy, headaches, sensory information, lights and sounds can cause pain that would make it very difficult for him to concentrate and very difficult to be efficient in his decision making.
Despite his injury, Howard leads his platoon out of the glider. 2 other gliders filled with infantrymen and engineers land nearby for the attack, all within 42 meters of the Caen Canal Bridge. If the Germans attack the gliders now, the loss of life could be catastrophic to the success of the mission. But luck is on their side. The German sentries, only meters away, disregard the sounds of the landing gliders, assuming they're hearing falling debris from a crashing bomber. East of the canal, the 3 gliders approaching the Orne River Bridge are not so lucky. 2 of the 3 gliders land successfully, but the 3rd glider takes a wrong turn.
This is the glider that contains Howard's second-in-command, Captain Priday, and this goes completely off beam.
Although he's missed his target, fate will hand Captain Priday a different role on D-Day. Meanwhile, at the Caen Canal, Major Howard's D Company troops rush towards the canal bridge. Leading the charge is Lieutenant Den Brotheridge, commanding the 1st platoon across.
He wants to be first across that bridge. He knows it's going to be dangerous, but he's going to be the man doing it.
There are two German sentries. One of them manages to fire a flare, and then he's shot and killed. The other one runs.
As they continue across the bridge, Brotheridge and his platoon are attacked by machine gun fire coming from the far side of it now.
And one of those bullets, sadly, goes through Brotheridge's throat, and he's mortally wounded.
Lieutenant Brotheridge becomes the first battle casualty of D-Day, but his men are so dedicated to seizing the bridge that they don't even notice he's fallen until minutes later. Brotheridge's platoon continues across the bridge to take up a defensive position on the west bank as the Royal Engineers search for explosive charges on the bridge and cut their fuses.
It's pretty much standard operating procedure that if you're assigned a key bridge like that, if you cannot hold it, you blow it up.
The engineers would have to come in and secure those explosives so that the Germans could not do that. It would have been extremely dangerous when you're working with explosives that any wrong move could potentially be set off, or the Germans could just go ahead and actually blow up the bridge if they were so inclined.
On the east bank, Howard's other two platoons clear bunkers and trenches with grenades and gunfire. The German defenders are overmatched. By 21 minutes after midnight, German resistance on the Caen Canal Bridge is over, and Major Howard's D Company, the Ox and Bucks, have full control of this critical throughway. Howard soon gets word that the nearby Orne River Bridge is also fully captured by his men.
Fortunately, the defenders of that bridge don't put up even as much of a fight as they do on the Caen Canal Bridge, and they flee before there's even a shot fired.
But a lone German soldier manages to survive the bridge attack and retreats to headquarters to inform his commander. Major Howard knows he's in for a tough night, defending these bridges. The Allied invasion of France is just hours away, and the Germans haven't got a clue about what's coming.
It was a nasty night. They assumed that nobody was going to land, and boy, did they assume wrong.
The Germans predict an Allied assault on France as early as 1942, but they are unable to predict exactly where and when it might be, so they bolster the defenses across the Western Front.
For the last 2 years, one of the great obsessions of Hitler had been reinforcing this Atlantic Wall, this extraordinary concrete fortification that ran from Norway right down to the Franco-Spanish southern coast.
That is a massive defensive structure. Thousands and thousands of landmines, thousands of machine gun nests, thousands of artillery.
In early 1944, Hitler assigned one of his best men, Field Marshal Erwin Rommel, to improve the wall's defenses in preparation for an Allied attack. The highly decorated Rommel had earned the nickname the Desert Fox for his exploits as commander of the German forces in North Africa. The Germans suspect the attack will come at Pas-de-Calais, 350 kilometers east of the actual D-Day landing sites.
Ideally, you want the shortest crossing, and that was this crossing from Dover to Pas-de-Calais. So it was identified as being the location where the Allies would hit back at German occupation in France. And of course, we played to that presumption.
The section of the Atlantic Wall at Pas-de-Calais is strengthened with an enormous amount of concrete and steel, and the Nazis install 3 major gun batteries, pointing their 406mm cannons at Dover, England.
There were things called hedgehogs, wedged down into the ground with a sharpened spike at the top. The boats would have been hung up on the hedgehogs, which would have caused a massive water traffic jam and prevented the Allies from landing.
In the months leading up to D-Day, the Allies launch a massive disinformation campaign aimed at keeping the Nazis' attention on Pas-de-Calais. But the actual attack will happen in Normandy, and the first Allied troops are already on the ground. 30 minutes after the gliders first left for the coast of Normandy, the capture of the bridges is complete. Major Howard sends the magic words back to British intelligence operations, ham and jam. This signifies that reinforcements can begin to move in to bolster the troops. But one of the 6 gliders is still missing. Major Howard's second in command, Captain Proudet, realizes that they have landed in the wrong place. The nearby bridge is not the one he's meant to capture.
First of all, they're let off in the wrong place by the tug, and then the pilot of the glider mistakenly identifies the Dives River as the location where he should be. Now, this group have now got a problem.
He's going to be feeling the level of anxiety. So he's operating in a vacuum where he doesn't know what's happening, and he bears responsibility as second in command for making it successful.
He has to make good. He's luckily used to having a bit of military authority. He's clearly got his wits about him. And he buckles down and secures a bridgehead on the Dives River.
Although this isn't Perday's original objective, he decides to capture the bridge anyway. The Germans put up a fight, but they're no match for Captain Perday and his men, and the bridge is taken.
This was a job that's actually been assigned to the 1st Canadian Parachute Battalion. And once they've secured that bridge, they then begin to move back towards their actual location, which is Ranville and then those 2 bridges.
Around the time that Howard and Perday are securing their bridges, other Allied missions are beginning, paving the way for the D-Day landings later that morning. A 1,200 airplane assault heads to the coast of France to target the Atlantic Wall.
Where you send in the bombers in advance of the land invasion to compromise as best you can the German defenses. The more damage that you can inflict from the air, the more likely for success you have on that beach invasion.
The bad news is it's terrible weather. There's a lot of cloud cover, which makes bombing really tricky at best. And of course, you still have anti-aircraft defenses, which the Germans are manning, which makes your life a little bit of a nightmare.
Meanwhile, at the Caen Canal and Orne River bridges, Major Howard and his men are braced for a German counterattack.
They need to hold them long enough for the 7th Paratroop Battalion to get there in time to reinforce them.
At around 50 minutes past midnight, the 600 paratroopers, led by Lieutenant Colonel Richard Pine Coffin, start to land in their designated drop zones east of the bridges.
They're expecting 7th Para to arrive within the hour, but of course, as is the way with parachute troops who tend to be dropped over a dispersed area and it takes them a long time to finally all meet up and then get on the march, that 1 hour is going to string into more like 2. So you've got this crucial period that can this small group of force hang on until the Paras come to their rescue?
While Howard is waiting for the 7th to show up, he gets a welcome visitor who had parachuted into northern France an hour earlier. Brigadier Nigel Poet is on a mission to set up a base in the small French village of Ranville. He was accompanied in his jump by a Pathfinder unit, a small advance force of paratroopers tasked with setting up the drop zones for the 7th. As Poet confers with Howard, they can hear the sounds of German vehicles in the nearby villages of Benouville and Le Port. If reinforcements don't arrive soon, they will lose their hold on the bridge.
What they're concerned with is what's going to happen if the 21st Panzer Division comes into play.
The Germans build some impressive tanks. The Panzer, the Tiger, the Leopard. These tanks are larger and much more powerful than what the Allies have. There were multiple battles where it would take 2, 3, 4, 5 Sherman tanks to neutralize one of these massive German tanks.
The commander of the German 716th Infantry is informed at 1:20 that the British are in control of the Orne River and the Caen Canal bridges, which are fully intact. To stop the Allies from encroaching, the commander attempts to order the 21st Panzer Division to defend the bridge landing areas.
Now, if you could have counterattacked, they could have probably reclaimed them. But they couldn't because of this very complex command chain going right back to Berlin.
One person has insisted no Panzer divisions will be moved without his order, and that, of course, is the dictator Adolf Hitler. He's asleep, and no one has the courage to wake him up.
We know that this person had bouts of anger and would lash out sometimes at the bringers of bad news. So, understandably, his staff was a bit concerned about waking him up.
Hitler's unwillingness to allow other people to make decisions speaks to a couple things. One, his just total ego, that he would not allow anybody else to do that. His also distrust of a lot of the people who were around him. Therefore, he had to be the one who made all the decisions. And ultimately, that was to the detriment of the German forces, because that is not a sustainable model for military decision-making.
Although the Germans are aware that the Allies may attack northern France any time, they have no idea that June 6 is D-Day. And as the weather has taken a turn for the worst in early June, they're led into a false sense of security. They were so unconcerned that Nazi commander Erwin Rommel, in charge of the forces in Normandy, is not even in France at the time.
He hops it back to Germany to give to his wife a pair of shoes for her 50th birthday because he thinks that the weather simply isn't going to invite this unprecedented amphibious attack, and he gets it very wrong.
The German forces are left in the hands of lower-ranked officials.
If Rommel had been there, he may have ignored the fact that Hitler wasn't able to give an order or no one was prepared to wake him up. But he wasn't there, and his more junior commanders were not prepared to take that risk.
Although the German commanders are not permitted to order the panzers to move, they are able to move the support units assigned to them, and so begins the German counteroffensive to recapture the bridges. The 125th Panzer Grenadiers is ordered to assemble just to the east of the Orne River, to wait for further instructions. The 192nd Panzer Grenadiers is ordered to move in from the west, recapture the bridges, and attack the parachute landing zones. These troops don't have any heavy armor or tanks, so they are reinforced here by two other units, the 1st Panzerjäger Company and parts of the 989th Heavy Artillery Battalion from the north.
And they do have some armor, actually, and they eventually put together a small column of tanks.
The Germans head towards the bridges, but having had a few hours to dig in, Howard's men are ready for an attack, and they got a good bit of luck. One of the weapons at Howard's disposal is the Piat, a handheld anti-tank gun. As the first tank comes into view, one of the troops from D Company fires.
And incredibly, this charge explodes inside the tank and it blows up the ammunition. So there's an enormous explosion. And this so terrifies the Germans that not only does the rest of that column back up, they're now convinced that there's a much stronger force at the bridge with really effective 6-pounder anti-tank guns, which they don't have. And this gives the airborne troops crucial breathing space.
The 192nd heads back to headquarters in Bénouville to regroup. The German commander needs to assess the situation before attacking again. But the 192nd will return to the bridges. Having fought back the first attack, Howard and his men are relieved to see the first group of paratroopers from the 7th Battalion finally arriving at the bridge.
That's the moment where the squaddies, the ordinary soldiers on the bridge, can breathe the first sigh of relief, because most of the defensive heavy lifting from this point is going to be carried out by the 7th Parachute Battalion.
Sometime later, the regiment commander, Lieutenant Colonel Pine-Coffin, arrives with more men, for a total of 200 men in 3 companies, fewer than 50% of the men expected.
Ultimately, a lot of those missing guys do trudge in later on, but it's all about getting the maximum amount of force into the right place at the right time, so that they can take up positions and defend it against a counterattack.
The 7th A and C companies are positioned just outside of Bénouville, facing south towards the city of Caen, and B Company in La Poure facing Ouistreham to the north near Sword Beach, where the British troops will soon be landing. Howard's D Company is pulled back as reserved to hold the area between the 2 bridges. The 7th will bear the brunt of German counterattacks on the west side of the Caen Canal throughout the whole day.
You've got 200 paratroopers, so they don't have any big guns. All they've got are handheld anti-tank weapons and gammon grenades to stop an armoured attack. But you've got a potential force of thousands bearing down on you.
While the men at the bridge are busy holding off the Germans, 8 kilometers away at Sword Beach, the British begin their aerial and naval assault, targeting the German artillery and coastal defenses in preparation for the beach landings.
The landing on Sword Beach, as far as the Pegasus operation is concerned, is absolutely crucial, because this is where the relief is going to come. They don't know quite how long it's going to take for them to get through those defenses. So although they estimate they might be able to relieve the bridges by midday, possibly a few hours later, they don't know for sure.
Thank you for exploring the past with us. If you enjoyed this deep dive, subscribe and join our global community. Follow us for more snapshots of history. And remember, the timeline has no borders. We'll see you in the next chapter.